Marc J. Victor has represented clients in many high-profile and media attention cases. We hugely thank Marc for his support of this event, for allowing this to occur in such a fantastic venue. Otherwise, we'd be meeting in a washroom at the Howard Johnsons. So if you like this as opposed to that, we've got to put our hands together. For Marc Victor.
What a great introduction. Boy, I was thinking so many different kinds of criminal offenses out there. But, you know, if they just got rid of the drug stuff, we could trim out over 50% of all this craziness we're doing in the justice system. You know, that's more than 50% of what I do these days. In any event, my talk is entitled Dealing with the King's Men, What to Do When Confronted by the Police. It's true, I've represented probably now several thousand people in major criminal cases. I do want to mention, by the way, we've recently expanded our law firm. We're doing cases on a national stage now, and I've got cases in many different states outside of Arizona in lots of different courts, federal courts and state courts. And it's sort of interesting to me because every state has a little bit different twist on things. I'm not going to be able to cover everything today that you need to know dealing with the King's Men. But if you go over to the Marc Victor booth over there, I don't know if we've got enough signs over here for you to find it, but anyways, right over there. I've got lots of articles that I would encourage you to take. They're much more comprehensive than my comments here today will be. I really want to direct you to the Are You Really for Freedom article. It's a short one. It's a real easy read. And I'm just curious how many people really are for freedom rather than just things that they personally enjoy. Also, I've got one over there entitled Legalize Methamphetamine. Just curious, how many want to legalize methamphetamine? Wow, I never get a reaction like that. Even when I talk to the pot smoker group, you know, I say, hey, who thinks we should get to drink beer? And everybody says, yay! And who thinks we should get to use marijuana for medical purposes? They all say, yay! And I say, who thinks you get to smoke pot just because you like how it makes you feel? And the place goes crazy. And then I say, and who thinks we should legalize methamphetamine? And the place is silent. Anyway, just some of the work that we still need to do. I also want to point out, too, that I've done some videos that are also more comprehensive than my comments here today will be. They're on my website, which is real easy to remember, Attorney for Freedom. I may be the only attorney who's for freedom. I don't know, Mac McPherson's here today, too. Some of his literature is on my table over there as well. But we've got some videos there that go a little bit more in detail for things like traffic stops. Also, gun rights. That's important. If you're going to carry a firearm, and you certainly should, especially if you're an American, you ought to have somewhat of a feel for deadly force and when you can, as I like to say, whip it out. And then also some searches and seizures. I may get into that. I don't have a lot of time here today. But also, my wife Tracy is running around with packets. Inside those packets are my business card. On my business card is my telephone number. You can get a hold of me 24/7, 365. If you call me in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. because you're at the police station and you're wherever, even if you're in Ohio, you call my law firm, you'll get a prompt that says, if this is an emergency, press 1, you'll be connected to an attorney right now. So long as that phone wakes me up, which it usually does, I will talk to you right then and there for free. Pretty much what I'm going to tell you, you already know, right? Just shut up. That's really good advice. It's simple. Very good advice. But I've got some other pretty good advice that I'm going to give you, also very simple for terms of dealing with the King's Men. How about this one? Don't get pulled over by the police. Seems really simple. And sometimes you can't avoid it, right? But at least don't be a free stop. And what I mean by a free stop, driving down the road with lights out, your registration is expired, even little safety problems like a cracked windshield or bald tires. Did you know that a police officer has a legal right to pull you over just because of a safety problem? Of course, if you're speeding, I confess, I speed all the time. I can't help it. But at least know you are being a free pullover for a police officer, even things like signaling for turns. So you should be aware of those things when you're driving down the road and do the best you can to avoid that. Something that you need to understand. A lot of people don't understand this. It doesn't matter what the officer is thinking, okay? It doesn't matter if the officer is thinking, hey, this person looks like somebody who might have a marijuana cigarette in their car, or they just left a house where people are known to have marijuana cigarettes inside. I'll follow them and wait for them to not signal or something. And then you say, aha, he didn't really pull me over for that. He pulled me over because he thought I had some marijuana. It doesn't matter. The Supreme Court said we're not going to get into the subjective thought processes of the police officer. The only thing that matters is, did they have a legal reason to pull you over? And so remember, traffic stops, I got an article over there that's entitled Surviving a Traffic Stop, because I don't think that your main goal in a traffic stop is to avoid the ticket. It's nice if you can avoid the ticket, and I'm in favor of avoiding the ticket, but you can be killed at a traffic stop, right? You can be shot and killed at a traffic stop. So and lots of people have been. They're tense, stressful things for officers. You know, it's the number one area where officers get injured or killed is on the side of the road in a traffic stop. And some of these officers, as some of you may know, are very excited at the time they're pulling you. And a good clue, by the way, is that they're walking around with their hand on the side where the gun is, right? That means they're excited. You need to make sure things do not escalate, because things can escalate very, very quickly on the side of the road. And also remember this. Don't think of this as a good opportunity to make pals, to make a new friend, okay? It's very unlikely that anything is going to happen at that traffic stop that's going to improve your life. Your life isn't going to get better. You can only lose on that traffic stop. The best you can get is, my life isn't going to get any worse. But there's almost unlimited downside potential, right? You can be killed, you can be cuffed, you can be hauled off to live the rest of your days in a cage, or even just a night in a cage. You can be fined. Lots of bad things can happen. So treat this like a business transaction. The first thing that should be going through your head when those lights come on and you've pulled over, and by the way, I should mention this too, pull over. Not all of my clients pull over when those lights go on, and I can assure you that turns out really bad for the driver. As Chris Rock said, if the cops got to chase you, they're going to be bringing an ass kicking with them. They almost always do. It's not going to turn out good for you. So if the lights come on, pull over. That's the first piece of advice. But remember, that officer's walking up to the car. That officer is evaluating you. That officer doesn't know who that person driving that vehicle is. The officer's looking at your car. The officer's looking at your bumper stickers, right? I got a case not too long ago where, and this was actually in the affidavit for a search warrant to somebody's home, they noticed that the person had a Ron Paul bumper sticker on their car outside parked in the driveway. Well, of course they must have drugs inside the house, right? Because they support Ron Paul. So if you have a Ron Paul bumper sticker on your car, that might tell the police officer something. If you have stickers like Ernie Hancock might have on his car, they're going to be walking with the hand on the gun. But remember, they're evaluating you. So stay in your car. Don't get out of your car ready to confront the police officer. That's going to excite them. Stay calm. I know this one's going to be hard. I know it's going to be hard to be respectful to the police officer, because not all of you are. But I will let me hang this little footnote out there. There are some good police officers. I don't want to broad brush all of them. There are some good police officers. This is me telling you, right? I'd tell you if they were all bad. They're not all bad. I have encountered in my 17 years of practicing criminal defense people who I would call peace officers. A peace officer to me is someone who became a police officer to look for bad guys. A bad guy, somebody who violates someone else's rights, right? somebody who hurts somebody, somebody who steals something and runs down the street. They're actually not looking for good guys who are violating any of the numerous little ridiculous rules out there. There are cops out there like that. This is my opinion, but my opinion is that there are getting fewer and fewer and fewer and further in between. I'm not running into them all the time. I'm running into, more commonly, the law enforcement officer. You know the law enforcement officer, right? What percentage is the question? Boy, that's tough. I will tell you this. My opinion is there are more law enforcement officers than there are peace officers, for sure. Also, some of the peace officers I've spoken to have decided they no longer want to be peace officers because they're dealing with law enforcement officers. And then, of course, you get the peace officer who says, well, I'd sure love to be a peace officer, but, it's not my job. I got to enforce all these rules. I'd like to change it. He's kind of like the Nazi who says, I don't think it's right to kill Jews, and I'm not in favor of that. I wish they changed the law. But as long as that's the law, they need to get into the gas chambers. I get a few of those, too. But remember, on the side of the road, things are going to escalate quickly. So you got to move slowly, stay calm. Don't seem upset. No matter how upset you are, you got to be sweet. You got to pretend you respect their authority. If you don't respect their authority, at least respect this. They all carry guns. They all have badges and radios where they can call in a bigger gang of thugs than you can possibly call in. They all have handcuffs to take you away. So at least respect that. My advice is keep your hands on the wheel, right? 10 and 2. Why? Because if you don't keep your hands on the wheel, they might assume that you are reaching for a gun to shoot and kill them. And they can react to that. It's not a social call. This isn't a great opportunity to start talking about, constitutional law and how you think the Fourth Amendment should be interpreted differently. You should also be evaluating the police officer. There are different kinds of officers, like I've already started to describe. There's a variety out there I call the veteran officer. This person's generally pretty respectful to you. They'll walk up. You'll roll the window down. They'll say, hi, sir, or ma'am, how are you? How are things going this evening? That's probably somebody who's not looking to give you a hard time. They may just give you a warning or something. But beware of the sneaky officer, right? You know the sneaky officer. They're very quietly trying to gather evidence against you. That question, do you know how fast you were going? You know why they're asking you that, right? They're asking you that to extract your admission to speeding or who knows what else. Then, of course, there's the Nazi police officer. Did I say that? You could recognize this person. Generally speaking, they're on a motorcycle, and they got a really, really short haircut, and they're wearing the big boots, and they're excited. They're upset, and they might ask you questions like, do you know how fast you were driving on my road? That should be a clue. You're probably dealing with a lunatic right there. And you think it's funny. This person is most likely to shoot you. This person is most likely to arrest you. This person is most sensitive to you being disrespectful of their authority. They think you work for them. You need to be careful with that person. You need to act accordingly. You need to avoid doing anything that could possibly excite that police officer. Let me tell you some of the things that will excite the police officer. I'll give you this category. This is what I call the must-dos. First thing, like I said, pull over. You got to pull over. You don't have an option. Now, let me just hang this little footnote in here. You are female. You're driving by yourself. It's late at night. Nobody else is around. There's nothing that's well lit. And here comes that undercover police officer with the blue light. You're not exactly 100% sure whether or not this really is a police officer. Most police officers will not be upset if you drive just a little bit further down the road to that shopping center or that well-lit area and then pull over there. Some of them will. But I think I'd rather deal with that than be hoodwinked by somebody who's impersonating a police officer, because that happens too. But for the most part, pull over. Officers will appreciate it, by the way, if you pull over in such a way and in such a place that doesn't put them at risk. I've had people pull over by stopping in the high-speed lane. That's bad. That's something that they'll use against you in your DUI case. Don't do that. Pull over into a side road, somewhere where they can walk up to the driver's side or the passenger side, and they're not going to be run over. They'll appreciate that. You have to provide your driver's license. And in this crowd, I should add, you need to have a driver's license. Keep that in mind. The government says that you don't have a right to drive on their roads. That's their position. Their position is they might give you a privilege. They may bestow upon you the privilege that is directly given to you by the king and the king's men to drive your vehicle on their roads. That is their attitude. So you have to provide that license. The registration, the government, you got to pay the government some tithing to register your vehicle to drive on their roads, and generally proof of insurance. You got to give them all that stuff. Certain states like Arizona, if you're going to have a concealed weapons permit, you should check, depending on the state that you're driving, and there may be some rules about that. Like, for example, in Arizona, if they ask you and you're carrying a concealed weapons permit, you got to fork that over. Normally a firearm, there might be some laws about that. In Arizona, if they ask you, do you have a firearm in your car? You have to answer that question. If they say cough it up, all right, tell me where it is, I'm going to get it, you got to comply with that. In all states, if the officer says, get out of the vehicle, this is an area that causes problems all the time. You have to get out of the vehicle, even if you're not the driver, even if you're just the passenger. So don't get into a discussion with, why I got to get out of the vehicle? What did I do wrong? Why did I get pulled over? They don't have to tell you that. Yeah, you hear what I said? They don't have to tell you that. You have to get out of the vehicle, and you are going to get out of the vehicle. It's kind of like, easy way or hard way. So my advice is, get out of the vehicle. The Supreme Court of the United States has decided that the officer has that power to order you out of the vehicle. You also have to remain at the scene. Now, if it goes on for too long, I don't think it's a bad question for you to say, by the way, Mr. Nice Friendly Officer, am I free to leave? And if the officer says, yes, you are, then I think you should leave. Let me give you some should not do's. Do not volunteer information. Even if they ask, hey, where are you coming from? Where are you going? What are you up to? What's this stuff in your car? Don't volunteer anything. Don't get into a chatty conversation. Don't lie. Some people think that when I say remain silent, what I'm telling you to do is to lie. I'm not suggesting that you lie. I'm suggesting you shut the heck up. I don't think you should answer questions. Now, there's the Marc Victor suggested way to not answer a question, which is something along the side of, I'm sorry, Mr. Nice Friendly Officer, I'd love to answer your questions, but I have a good friend, Marc Victor, who's my criminal defense lawyer, and he'd kill me if I answered any questions. I like to call him right now. He says it's okay, I'll answer questions. Don't be a jerk about it. That's going to upset them. Remember, they got a lot of discretion on the side of the road. I hate to tell you, but they own that situation. You got to be careful. Don't argue with them. Don't get into discussions with them about things. Now, I can't tell you the rule on this in every state, but generally, those games on the side of the road, generally speaking, you should avoid doing those. And you might want to clarify, say, officer, I know you're asking me to walk a straight line and to touch my nose and to stand on one foot and to do all these things. Are you ordering me to do that? Do I have to do that? If the answer is, well, you don't have to, don't. Because remember, who's deciding how you did? Not you. Not your buddy in your car. It's that cop on the side of the road. And of course, don't consent to any searches. I don't have to spend 5 or 10 minutes with you guys explaining to you that even in the case where you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't consent to a search, right? I mean, damn it, you're an American. You have a right to privacy. They work for the government. Why on earth would you be just letting them search and ferret through your stuff? Don't do that. And remember, if they're asking you for your consent, that means probably they need it. If they thought they didn't need your consent, they're going to start tearing your stuff up right then and there. Let me give you some should-dos. Determine if you're free to leave. If I have some time, I'll give you an example of a case I finished up not too long ago that turned on that issue. And the reason that's important is sometimes it's not so clear. The officer might say, oh yeah, he was free to leave. He was just hanging around. He was talking to me. And that's when all this stuff happened. I'm going to try to argue, no, you were not free to leave. You were detained. They have to provide a level of evidence, reasonable suspicion for that. So you might want to clarify that. If you find yourself in a situation and the officer's asking you questions, you might want to say, hey, am I free to leave? Because if I am, I'm leaving. I'm not hanging around. Force that issue. I think you should ask to call your attorney immediately. You have an attorney, whether it's me or someone else or someone you're going to find in the phone book. I want to call my attorney early and often. Don't get upset if they say no. I love it when they say no. I love it. There's nothing better for me than when my client early on said, I want to call my lawyer. Cop says, no. No, but I really want to call my lawyer. No. On and on and on and on. That's great. What am I going to tell him anyways? Who knows what I'm going to tell him? Shut up, right? That's what I'm going to tell you. That's what a competent lawyer is going to tell you. So now you know what we're going to say. But what I really want to argue is that they deprived you of your right to counsel. In some states like Arizona, you have a right to counsel even earlier than the federal law says you have a right to counsel. And by the way, sometimes they're going to cite you with something, right? You're cited. They're going to say, hey, sign here. Do you sign? Yes or no? Nobody wants to play around. I got a no back there. Any yeses? One yes. Yeah, you sign. Guess what happens if you don't sign? You're going to jail. Unless you want to go to jail. I mean, there's free food in jail. You should sign. All they're having you sign is that you've been served with this complaint. No big deal. Better than going to jail. You got other battles to fight. If you're arrested, do not resist. You do not have a right to resist even an unlawful arrest, right? So they come up to Ernie Hancock and they say, hey, we recognize you. You're Butler Schaefer. We've been looking for you for years. He says, no, man, I'm not Butler Schaefer. Butler Schaefer taller than me. They said, no, you're Butler Schaefer. There's a warrant out for your arrest. Put your hands behind your back. Ernie doesn't have a right to resist that unlawful arrest. He still has to comply. No, you do not have a right. I get those cases all the time where the arms stiffen up and the cop says, hey, he stiffened up his arms. He didn't want to go into the handcuffs. Unless you're Shelton or somebody, you like going to jail and you like giving the police a hard time. I mean, if your name is 4409 or something like that, then that's just what you do. But if you're a regular person that doesn't enjoy going to jail and being charged with resisting arrest, don't resist an arrest with either active force or passive force. And by the way, I know you've all heard, well, that's not resisting anything. They're just going to take you, put you in cuffs and take you away. So that's fine. Don't worry about the Miranda warnings. I know you've all heard. I know you've all seen on TV that somebody gets arrested and they read you Miranda, right? Your right to remain silent. Everybody knows about that. And by the way, you should think about that for a second. The cop just told you 4 things, right? Number 1, you got a right to remain silent. Think about that. You have a right to remain silent. But just in case you needed more information, they're giving you more information, right? Anything you say is going to be used against who? You. By the way, you have a right to a lawyer, and if you can't afford one, they'll give you one for free. Who would talk at that point? Most people do. I don't know why, but you shouldn't. Don't worry about Miranda. They don't have to read you Miranda lots of times. The only time they have to read you Miranda is if you're already under arrest and now they're interrogating you. And even if they don't then, sometimes it's still not a big deal. Don't get excited about that. Just keep your mouth shut and move on. If they arrest you, you're going to see a judge pretty quick. I want to tell you a few things about the Fourth Amendment. Who here likes the Fourth Amendment? Who here knows what the Fourth Amendment is, right? Searches and seizures. The Fourth Amendment is a collection of words on a piece of paper that says that you have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. And whenever I talk about the Fourth Amendment, I like to sort of recast it in more meaningful terms that I think help people understand it a little bit better. So think of the Fourth Amendment like this. Here's what the Fourth Amendment says. The government has a right to search or seize anyone or anything, so long as the government decides that what the government did was reasonable. Does anybody feel like you got some great protection there? I mean, that's what it says, and that's what it means. So don't get too excited about the Fourth Amendment. How much time do I have? Am I running out of time? Oh, Ernie wants me to mention my card. That card that I was telling you about, that hopefully you will carry. We've got probably 1,000 of them on there. If you can't resist the urge to just shut up like I'm telling you you should do, if you just have to talk to the police, on the back of my business card is exactly what I think you should say to the police. And let me tell you why I drafted this up and put it on my business card. Because early on in my career, I realized that the police in certain circumstances had to read Miranda. And I know there's those 4 warnings, and I know I'm dealing with police, and so they might forget, right? And so I used to ask, Mr. Nice Friendly Police Officer, did you read my client those Miranda warnings? They said, yes. Well, how do you know you read all 4? Well, because I pulled out of my pocket this department issue Miranda card that had all 4 warnings on it. And so I thought, man, that's pretty good. That stopped me right in my tracks. Maybe I'll print up something on the back of my business card that makes it clear what my client was saying. So they pulled out their law firm issued Mark J. Victor business card, and they flip it over on the back, and they started reading. Right now, usually the cop doesn't care about that. You can't hold it like you could, one of those crosses for the vampires or the garlic for the... I wish it worked like that, but it doesn't. But at least it makes clear later on in court exactly what it was that you either said or slash were trying to say. So I recommend that you carry that and at least read the back. You guys want to hear about a couple of cases or no? Because I know I'm running out of time here. Yes, no? All right, I'll take that as a yes. 2 cases. I think they're both interesting. The first guy, now this is weird. I couldn't make this stuff up. This is a true story. Both of these are true stories. Mr. G, I'll call him. On July 4th, for whatever reason, he's driving down the road right where my law firm is. And it's raining out, and he decides he wants to send a text messages. So like any responsible citizen, he pulled his car off the road and parked it to send his text message. Guess where he parked? He parked in the parking lot for my law firm. He parked under the covered parking perpendicular to the striped spaces. And he's sitting there in the rain, and he's sending his text messages. He has no passengers in his car with the exception of the bag of marijuana he was transporting. A police officer is driving northbound right by my law firm. This, by the way, is about 9 o'clock at night. And the officer very astutely, I think he was just trying to make sure my law firm was safe. He looked into the parking lot of my law firm, and he sees this guy parked perpendicular to the striped spaces, sitting in this car, no other cars in the parking lot. So he pulls in, and he parks at the side of my building, and he conducts surveillance for 1 minute. He watches this guy in this car. What's he doing? He doesn't know. So after 1 minute of surveillance, by the way, the officer says there were some burglaries in that area. Of course, when I checked, there were no burglaries in that area, but that's what he said to me, so we checked. So the officer, after 1 minute of watching, pulls up to this guy and turns on the bright spotlight, illuminating the inside of this guy's car, who, of course, is startled, sees this police officer behind him shining a bright light. My client, Mr. G, he turns on his car, puts it in drive, and starts driving away. Who says he did the right thing by trying to drive away? Ernie did. Marc Hall did. Who says he did the wrong thing? You guys are all wrong. I'm going to tell you why. He started driving away. He drove about 3 feet before the officer lit him up with the blue lights, right? Now he's pulled over. Why was that important? I'm going to tell you why that was important. I just told you guys about this. Here's why. This is why it's a good real-life example. Had he just sat there when Officer Friendly exited his car and walked up to the window, which my client rolled down, and then he smelled that green leafy substance, you know the rest of the story. At that point, the story's over. He gets arrested. He gets charged with 2 felonies. What the officer would have said was, oh, man, there was no stop. This was a voluntary contact. I saw this guy. I don't know if he needs help or what. I just walked up to see how he was doing, smelled marijuana. Case over. He's dead. But because he popped it into drive and rolled 3 feet and bam, now the lights came on, that made it clear to the Superior Court judge, who eventually ruled for me, that this was an involuntary encounter. That police officer now needs to show reasonable suspicion that this guy who was sitting outside my law firm texting was suspected of committing some criminal offense. What did he have? Nothing. So his entire case was suppressed and my client walked. That's why we won. That sort of highlights the importance of making it clear whether it's a voluntary contact or not. Does everybody understand that? Because it's a really important concept. Second case, this was State versus Jeffrey Smith. You know why I can tell you his name? Because he did it for the activism, which was cool. Ernie knows about this case. Jeff Smith, he's about 60 years old, never had a problem, lived a productive life. He was upper management his whole life. He's got one woman he's with for, 30 years or something. He's now retired. It's midnight. He's sitting in his house with his good buddy, and he's doing some internet gambling, and he's smoking a joint in his home. Oh, my word. And Officer Friendly exits the police substation to go presumably find some real bad guys, but instead smells the odor of marijuana somewhere in the air. So what does he do? A, says, I got real bad guys to chase down, get in his car and look for the real bad guys. Or B, start trucking through the neighborhood of the condominium to find where the source of the smell of marijuana is. Who chooses B? Right, you guys know it's B, right? So Officer Hound Dog traces through the condominium complex till he finds the offending window, which happens to be open because my client's air conditioning wasn't working so good. So he had a fan blowing the hot air and odor of marijuana outside his window. The officer looks inside the window, pounds on the window, and says, "Open the front door." Guess what my client does? He opens the front door. Later on, months later, I said, "Dude, what were you doing? You knew you had weed inside your house. Why on earth did you open the front door?" And he gave me an answer I didn't actually anticipate. You know what he said? He said, "I was high. I wasn't really thinking." Okay. But he gave me an argument that, hey, that cop who didn't have a search warrant, who didn't really have much, ordered him to open the front door of his home. That was one problem. And then the officer, when my client opened the front door, the officer says, are you smoking marijuana? He says, "Yeah, we were." The officer says this, and I put this in quotes in my notes here just so I can remember. "Are you willing to go inside with me to get the marijuana?" Now, is that a voluntary search? Is that an order? What is that? Do you see why this creates problems for me as his lawyer? Because if the officer says, "Gee, Mr. Smith, I'd really like to go into your house. I don't have a search warrant, and maybe I can't get one, but I don't have one in any event. So if you'd be so kind as to just let me walk into the house and search through your stuff, that would satisfy any requirement that the Fourth Amendment would probably have. Is that okay?" See, if he says that, no problem. If he says, "I'm going to march through your front door right now and ferret through all your stuff looking for that green leafy substance," now we got a better argument. You see the difference? But that's what he said. Well, incidentally, in court at the evidentiary hearing, when I pointed this out to the officer told me a request and an order are really the same thing, so it doesn't matter, which kind of surprised me. So in any event, my client gets charged with 2 felonies, and we're off to the races about this situation. We go to court. My client says, hey, look, I've never been an activist in any way, shape, or form, and I'm interested in making a big stand on this case. So he decides to fight the case, which was really fun for me, because now we got 2 felonies. It's going to be a jury trial. We got a suppression motion. We're complaining about all kinds of things. And we actually put on a long series of hearings. And I remember my favorite part of the case was when the Superior Court judge called me back in chambers with the prosecutor and said, Mr. Victor, she said, oh, by the way, I should tell you this. The prosecutor, who really, really, really wanted to avoid a jury trial, said this: we're going to designate these felonies as misdemeanors, which takes away my client's right to a jury trial, which I didn't like, but we decided we'll still march forward with a bench trial because we weren't going to take any deals. So now we're litigating this little misdemeanor marijuana case, and the Superior Court judge takes me back in chambers, and she says, Mr. Victor, like she's upset with me, do you realize how much time we're spending on this little misdemeanor case? Her exact words, I'm spending more time on this little misdemeanor case than I do on some of my first-degree murder cases. And I said, well, Judge, I'm not the one who brings these stupid charges. Talk to the prosecutor. They want to prosecute these ridiculous cases. It's their fault you're spending all this time on this case. They should just dismiss it. Anyways, long story short, the judge ruled for us and found that the entrance into the home was unconstitutional, and everything got suppressed, and my client walked and had a victory, I would say, for freedom. And by the way, good for him for standing up on this case, because really, without any priors and without any problems, this guy really would have just got his case dismissed. He would have said he would have gone to 3 months of counseling and testing through the TASK program. Don't smoke marijuana for 3 months and we'll drop the case. That's in essence what he was looking at. But instead, he took a stand and he fought the case. And we kind of smoked out these police officers, because it was clear, by the way, as we were going through the evidence, that the officers were indeed lying about some things too. So it was a pretty good win, at least for him as an individual. So let me just close with this, because I know I'm probably going over time. I'll take some questions if you guys have questions. The bottom line is this. This justice system, which, by the way, lots of people call the injustice system, is really a very scary place. You want to avoid getting involved in this system at all costs. The prison system is hugely overcrowded. It is sinking like the Titanic in all states. The prison population, does anybody know how much the prison population has increased since 1980? I'll tell you, 347%. In 1980, we had 160 people for every 100,000 living in a cage in prison. Now we got 554. Actually, that was in 2008, and it's even higher now. National spending on prisons has gone from $10 billion to $50 billion in the last 20 years. So, of course, you know that here in the so-called land of the free, we incarcerate more people than any other country on the face of the planet, not just by raw numbers, but also by percentage of our population. So the land of the free is also the land of the incarcerated. Lots of these, unfortunately, are victimless crimes. And I said this in court just this week. I was in court on a marijuana case, and I'm standing there, and it was a case where this guy was going to wind up doing some time in a cage, not very much, fortunately. I think just a couple of months. He was putting together a deal for 300 pounds of marijuana. And I said, Judge, this guy is going to go now live in a cage. Our society has said he's so horrible, he's so bad, he can't even live among us. He needs to be put in a cage like an animal. And yet, if this guy moved in next to me and my wife and my kids, I wouldn't be the least bit bothered. I'd be honored to have this guy as a neighbor. And I turned around and I looked at everyone in the courtroom and I said, nobody in this courtroom is going to stand up and say they're even mad at my guy. Because nobody is mad at my guy. Nobody's been trespassed. Nobody's been harmed in any way. There's not one person on the planet that I'm aware of who's even upset with my guy. Yet, he's got to go live in a cage like an animal. That's how screwed up our justice system is. And keep in mind, I'm not just talking about people who have committed all these ridiculous victimless crimes. I'm also talking about people who are flat innocent of crimes. We have that too. So don't ever think that just because, well, I'm never going to be committing any crimes, that I'll never need a criminal defense attorney. Who are you to say that? What, do you really think that our government runs this justice system in such a way that only people who commit real crimes are charged with crimes? If you think that, you're out of touch. Let me tell you this. In closing here, a criminal defense attorney in any criminal case, we really only have two weapons. Weapon number one, the threat to the prosecutor that we might take the case to trial, and if we do, we might win. If they think that, they'll back down. They'll give you at least a better deal. If they think there's no way you'd go to trial, and even if you did, there's no way you're going to win, you're in trouble. That means you have to rely on your second and final weapon, which is what I call affectionately the pain in the ass factor. Don't feel bad about the fact that the government is overloaded with crimes. They are so busy. I get more done, not because I'm some great advocate, because as my wife can attest, I'm a pain in the ass. And a pain in the ass in the justice system will get, in my experience, just as much accomplished on behalf of my clients as a great advocate would with a great argument. So do everything you can if you find yourself on the verge of entering the justice system, and I hope you won't. Do everything you can to make it easier for your criminal defense attorney to get your ass from going into a cage like an animal. Hope I've given you some good tips. I'm available all weekend if you have questions. I don't know, do I have time to answer a couple questions or no? Oh, okay. Well, if you have questions, fire away.
Come on up. If you have questions, this would be a fantastic time to ask. You have a great legal mind at your disposal, and I think his rates are quite reasonable at the moment.
Well, thank you. Even coming from a guy with a Yankee cap on. There's nothing reasonable about that.
Hello, my name's John. Thank you for that. That was enjoyable. We all know the TSA is there for our safety, and I'm sure we all feel better flying nowadays. But I just read a news article recently that they are being employed on the highways of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee is using them for roadside searches. It's also been reported several months ago that they were employed at a high school prom to search high school students' things. And I'm wondering what the differences are between the rights, well, I guess not our rights, because they don't really seem to exist anymore with the Patriot Act and whatnot. But what are the police upheld to? What standard are the police upheld to where the TSA agents are not? And what are the differences in what we can and cannot do to defend ourselves against unlawful searches and seizures?
Well, first off, let me say I haven't seen any cases that have dealt with TSA agents sort of outside of the airport setting. But the rules that are applied, to the extent they restrain law enforcement officers and to the extent TSA is acting as law enforcement officers, and I don't know, let me say this, I would make an analogy to the Border Patrol people. We've done a lot of litigation on these checkpoint issues. You know, as you're coming through, you get these little Nazi-like checkpoints, papers, please. And Border Patrol agents and these checkpoints are there for immigration. But if you look, and we went through one on the way here yesterday that had stats up on the side, all the arrests they've made for drugs at the immigration checkpoint. Well, what's happened is they've been sort of cross-deputized to write citations. The Federal Border Patrol is writing citations for state marijuana cases. So we're getting a lot of this now really on all levels. We have in Arizona, we have local police officers who are on task forces with the FBI doing all kinds of things. So it doesn't surprise me if it's true that the TSA is now going to be involved in all these other things. But the rules are the same. To the extent you have any protections at all, the protections that you have in terms of the police, and actually, I just gave you two very recent cases where the rules were violated, even as the government interprets them against itself, and the cases were dismissed because of us simply pointing out that they violated the law. The rules are going to be the same, but let me just point this out, because a story I did read last week about the TSA is this new chat down concept. Have you guys heard about this chat down? Not only is there's the pat down now, but there's the chat down, which is the TSA saying, "Hey, where are you going? What are you up to? How long are you staying? All these sort of questions." You're an idiot if you answer those questions. I don't know. And by the way, there was a statistic, and this was at Logan Airport in Boston. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was well over 100,000 chat downs, and it was about 40 people who refused to answer questions. So we need to get those numbers much higher. So I don't know how to answer your question in a more detailed way than that.
Okay, thank you.
Any others?
I think you may be familiar with a friend of mine, Terry Bressy. This is a question about, I've been watching his videos, and I noticed that sometimes when he gets stopped at that checkpoint, they will demand that he open the window all the way, and he only opens it a little bit. Is there a reason for that, and are you required to open it all the way? How does that all work?
Well, look, I'm not aware of any rules or laws that say you have to open the window all the way. I'll say this. Terry Bressy, for those of you who don't know, I think he was probably my very first checkpoint case years and years ago, and I consider Terry Bressy a hero. He's a guy who's a scientist. He works in looking through telescopes, I think for U of A, and he's driving through sort of the back roads of Arizona. He comes up on one of these checkpoints, and he just didn't want to play. They said, well, do this, do that, do the next thing. He says, no, I want to go on my way. And eventually, what happened to him is what happens to a lot of people in these situations. His door was open, and he was grabbed, and he was dragged out and thrown in the dirt and kind of beaten up and charged with all kinds of what I would call trumped up criminal charges. And I got his case, and we litigated the thing, and we won, and he walked. And at the time, I wasn't doing civil rights cases. I am now, and I used to hate turning them down. I just didn't have the staff to pursue them. Now I do. And so he said, hey, I want to sue these guys now in federal court. I wasn't able to do it for him at the time. But he's been pursuing this lawsuit in federal court. So we've had lots of checkpoint cases. I can tell you this in terms of checkpoints generally. The Supreme Court has said clearly that general crime control checkpoints are unconstitutional, okay? So to the extent that the checkpoint looks like a general, hey, we're just checking for everything, okay, that probably will be held to be unconstitutional. They've said that checkpoints for immigration, if they're immigration checkpoints, really, those are constitutional. Checkpoints for DUI, those are constitutional. But, and this is the part where I think they screw up all the time, even if they're dealing with one of those, they have to have very clearly detailed rules for how to administer the checkpoint that limit the discretion. Like, for example, it's okay for them to stop every car. It's okay for them to stop every fifth car, or every third car, or every 25th car. But it's not okay for them to say, I think I'll stop this guy. I'll let this guy go. I think I'll stop this guy. And then, of course, there's the dog. And that's another whole can of worms. And I will tell you this. I went into this concept of the whole dog drug search thing thinking that, well, dogs are pretty good. Probably when the dog alerts, there's going to be drugs in the car. That was my bias. I mean, I like dogs. I have a dog. Dogs are good. But what I found out was this whole area is complete garbage. 100% garbage. That dog, by the way, it's not even clear to me what an alert is. I've had cases where an alert is, and I'll tell you this, the Border Patrol, this is on video, by the way. If you go to my website, you can see some of this stuff on video. The Border Patrol told me in court under oath that they had two possible alerts. One alert was if the dog changes his respiratory pattern. You'll like the second one even better. The second alert is a change in posture. Now, this is the dog who's weaving in between the cars as they're slowing down further. If he changes his posture, well, that's an alert. And then I've also had, barking, sniffing, his heart's pumping. That's the alert. And by the way, I have a very good dog expert. And I will say this, in terms of cops, Barry Cooper, you guys know about Barry Cooper? Never get busted. Barry's a friend of mine. He and I have formed somewhat of an alliance now on drug cases. Barry was as bad as you could be as a police officer in terms of a drug interdiction police officer. He smashed in more front doors. He was a trainer of people who had these dogs. He knows everything there is to know about dogs. he's the best person I have now on these drug dog cases. He's repented for his sins. He's had the holy water sprinkled on him, and now he's clearly one of us. And he tells me that, Mark, I could get any dog to alert, even a real alert, anytime I wanted to, and I did in hundreds of cases. By the way, I just finished a case that we did very, very well on as well. It was a dog case. And when we started pulling the records of this dog, what we found was in the last 22 alerts where the dog stopped and said, drugs by, having the heartbeat or having it change posture or whatever, 22 of the last times, only 7 of those times did they actually find drugs. Now, of course, the Border Patrol will say there are no false alerts. In each of those cases, they will say, well, there was an odor of drugs, and he can only alert to an odor of drugs, so the dog's never wrong. This is the stuff we're dealing with in the justice system. Okay, other questions?
Hi, I'm Adam. I got pulled over at a driver's license checkpoint in Hawthorne, California. And to make a long story short, they pulled me into this parking lot and they asked for my license and registration. I handed it over. The cop took the my license and put it in his back pocket and then wrote a ticket saying I was driving without a license. The police surrounded my vehicle. It ordered me out of the vehicle because they were impounding people left and right. And I don't know if there was a case I saw about a preacher going through a border checkpoint and they smashed his back window with a hammer. And
That's my case, too.
Oh, okay.
That's Pastor Anderson.
Yeah.
He's another guy charged with a whole bunch of stupid charges. We went to trial. We got a not guilty on everything, and we're currently in federal court on his case, suing them.
That's excellent. But I saw a guy in my mirror, and he had a taser, and he pulled it out, and then there was another guy hunched over by the back wheel. Now, I didn't know if he had a hammer or not. I never saw that, but I saw the taser out, and there's like at least 8 officers around my car, if not more. And my question is, later on, after I managed to get my ID back because I was harassing one of the lieutenants, I was talking about the president, and then I got on his good side, and he went over and got it back for me. But my question was, I heard later from a pilot that you are not required to hand over your pilot license because it's considered surrendering your license. And at the time when I originally tried to get my license back, one of the other officers said, no, he's not giving it back because you voluntarily surrendered your license. And my question is this. I've been told that you are merely required to show your license and registration when the officer asks for it, not to hand it over, which is why they usually ask license and registration, please. They don't say, hand me your license and registration, please. Is that a real legal construct? Because now I don't hand it to them. I'm like, I am not voluntarily surrendering this. This is what I'm required to do. But I don't know if that's accurate or not.
I think you're going to get yourself into trouble with that. I haven't seen any cases on it. But look, your situation raises all kinds of concerns. But I will point out this. Your privilege to drive isn't just that you have a license in your pocket. Remember, they can suspend or revoke your privilege to drive by some computer strokes in the system. You might still have your license on you. So it's conceivable to me that there might be something else going on out in the world where your privilege to drive actually was suspended, in which case he took your license, put it in the back pocket. He wasn't doing anything wrong. I don't know. I mean, there are lots of cases that come into my office where people are not even aware, like, for example, the photo radar things that are so popular now. People want to play games with, hey, I got it, but I'm throwing it in the trash, and I'm waiting to see if they serve me. Well, I can tell you this may be by bureaucratic accident or maybe more intentional. I don't know. But what happens is the government says, well, we went out and we served him, and now he didn't show up for court, and now his license is suspended. You don't know anything about it. You get pulled over for anything, and they say your license is suspended, your car is going to be impounded, you could be hauled off to jail. And now you're in this big giant mess, and you were completely unaware of the fact that your license was suspended. My advice on those is, look, there are so many battles out there to fight. Everywhere we turn around, there's another battle to fight. You got to pick your battles really carefully. And just for me, that particular battle, there's that website out there, Strike the Root. I'd rather be striking at the root than hacking at the higher branches on the tree. So But I'll also say this, just one final thing. When I talk to other criminal defense attorneys, and every once in a while I'm asked to give a presentation of some type to a group of lawyers, I always say to other criminal defense lawyers, one of the big purposes for our existence is to police the police. I mean, if we don't police the police as criminal defense lawyers, who's going to police the police? I mean, you can't trust them to just internally police themselves. The prosecutors aren't going to police the police. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that maybe you can find a lawyer in your state who will at least look into this thing and determine whether or not your rights have been violated, maybe hold somebody accountable for that. I can tell you my office right now has lots of these cases, and to my pleasant surprise, we've had pretty good success in terms of holding officers, overzealous officers, accountable in terms of money damages against their municipality.
I just wanted to say one last thing. My license wasn't suspended, revoked, or canceled by anybody, and it turned out that it was just like a decision on the officer who claimed that he had the right to have that decision, and they ended up I never got my car back.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
maybe you have a case. Maybe you have a case. I don't know.
Okay, just a quick question about, you were talking about chat downs. What about at the Border Patrol checkpoints when the fruit Nazi tells me, I have to tell them where I'm coming from and where I'm going to?
Here's my take on this. Remember, you have a couple things you're dealing with. One is, what's the law? The law is, it is an immigration checkpoint. They have a right to determine whether or not you're a citizen. If they suspect that you might not be a citizen, they can take further inquiry to determine. They always have a secondary checkpoint, right, where they send you to secondary, the dog's there, they're ferreting through your stuff. There's that issue. Then there's the secondary issue, which is what I kind of call being inconvenienced. You can mess with these guys if you want, but the chances are high you're going to be sent to secondary and detained for an hour or who knows how long. And, if they say, hey, where are you going? You don't have to answer that. Are you a citizen? Can you produce, can you produce some evidence? They have some reason to think maybe you're not a citizen. If it's along that line, they can detain you if they have concerns. If they're just looking for drugs or guns or something else, they can have problems. But my question to you is, do you want to be that kind of an activist where you invest the kind? I mean, look, there are people here who do. Terry Bressy was one of them, Ernie Hancock's another, Shelton's another. These guys like to invest that kind of time to make that kind of point. If you want to go down that road, you need to keep your conduct within the area of the law and let them go outside that and fight the fight. But you need to be prepared. You're going to be detained. You're probably going to be arrested. You might be charged, because it's not just what happened. It's what they say happened. And those can be two very different things. Keep that in mind. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and attention.